Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to welcome all of you to the panel, Waste Management and Energy. I shortly will read a part of the abstract which is based on this panel, and then I will present the panelists. So after presenting the panelists, we'll open the discussion. Firstly, let me shortly introduce you a part of this panel. So waste and energy, complete waste management today is a worldwide problem. In developed countries, there is a hierarchy of integrated waste treatment, which is based on sound strategies in which a significant part of waste is reduced, reused, and recycled. And what remains is followed by landfilling and incineration. In developing countries, this process often leads to much desired, where there is not only where the waste is not only used for the point of view of raw material and energy, but turns into a serious problem for health of living creatures and a burden for the environment. Certainly, the precursor steps of incineration are more efficient and lead to the conservation of reusable energy by preserving raw materials. Secondary to the manufacturing industry, today incineration or pyrolysis process are also seen as an important aspect of converting waste into energy. In addition to developed countries that use incineration and pyrolysis, in the last stage of the waste hierarchy, developing countries or even those in small geographical reach see incineration as an adequate solution to the problem of waste disposal. However, such processes require stronger transparencies and the direct link between the government, scientists, and civil society and public. So now I'll mention that the panel, of course, today has to discuss current issues and trends in waste management and waste to energy in terms of feasibility, efficiency, legislation, policy making, future developments, scientific approaches, and possible smart solutions. So let me shortly introduce you the panelists. We have Professor Jerzy Klemeš from the Brno University of Technology and also the ISC member of SDEWES, International Scientific Committee. Professor Ilirian Malolari from the Department of Industrial Chemistry, University of Tirana, and Professor Mystic Bare from the Department of Chemistry, University of Tirana. And so the floor is open now for discussion regarding the issue waste management and energy, waste management and energy. Thank you.
Okay, I prepared a couple of slides, as is a good habit for the panel, because you know when we are talking, we remember about 5% of what has been said. When you can see it's increasing, so not too many. Don't worry, it will not be another lecture. This is what we prepare with Ivan Fan, and she unfortunately can't be here because she just made a plenary lecture at Slovak Chemical Engineering Conference. And we are starting always with circular economy here. And it was mentioned 3R, but 3R is not enough. At the moment, there are many more R's. And you can see circular economy has got 10 R's. And it starts not with dealing with waste. It starts with refrain, refuse. Always thinking if we really need something that is creating waste. And it goes redesign, reduce, reuse, repair, and so on. And we should always try to be on the top, because recycling, which many people consider as green, is not too much green. And energy recovery is nearly the bottom option. it's happening when we haven't got anything else. And if we are going to the plastics, there are different classifications, and each of them are actually requiring some energy, but they can also create some energy. So we should be very careful and again consider my favorite footprint. Aggregated environmental performance, this is an example of a PET PET bottles where we've got a different price for kilogram, and it's quite interesting because if you see incineration is here, energy recovery, mechanical flows, open pyrolysis, classification, and some others. So we should consider what is how expensive and what is how polluted. Before energy valorization, we should look, this is an example of cascade utilization. We've got building, softwood, timber, we've got laminated timber, we've got starboard, we've got particle board, we've got wood chips, and we come from the level on the left-hand side, we can reuse, recycle. But when we are coming to the wood chips, it's the end of the world. And the similar it is with paper, because paper hasn't got option to be recycled indefinitely. With plastics, it is as well. So we should try to be on the left-hand side as much as possible. And on the other side, to use incineration or other options only for material which is not really possible to be recycled in the other way. So you've got the different key message and points for discussion. It's cascade utilization, recycling, secondary, quaternary, quaternary. We need to consider economic feasibility. We need to consider footprints. We also need to consider rebound effect, which is increasing waste amount, because sometimes when we are treating waste, we are creating another waste. So even incineration is not at the end of it, because from incineration we've got energy, which is fine, but we've got off gases, which can be the problem, and especially from plastics, it is dioxins and so on, and we've got the ash. So let's consider it, and of course, everything finishes with environmental footprint. So those are my points for the discussion.
Instead go there or I apologize for my unpleasant voice, but recently we have opened a discussion in Albania, a very big problem regarding to the waste management, which is the first has to be mentioned that unfortunately the politics has been entered into this issue, and there are some let's say discrepancy between opinions being given by the scientists and the technicians and the politicians, but also the social organizations has their own voice in it. And we have to discuss with you in November or late November or early December, we have appoint a conference or forum for the same issue that Professor just mentioned. What it is a dilemma to be solved, incineration or digestion or burning or let's say landfilling or let's say coupling on the ground. And this has been faced from the first moment of opening this discussion. We have got some opinions opinions and some other things that are regarding to the to the behavior that need to face the political voice. Indeed, there are a lot of opinions. Some are on the same way, some are on the reverse way. So we should ask you kindly to give some opinions to each other. Let's exchange some opinions according to your knowledge, according to your practicing, the best available practice of your countries. We have to open a discussion to let the others know that what is our behavior, what is our opinion. Is it definite or it is, let's say, not in equilibrium yet? This is the first. And then due to some restriction, political restriction or administrative restrictions, bureaucratic or some other things that are regarding to the to policymakers and to the stakeholders that are not the same on the same way. There are some lack of legislation on one side, but there are some overlap decision documents which are not going to the same way of thinking to be decided definitely. We need also to open a discussion with you shortly, of course, not to be solved in this room, but we need to share with you these opinions. And what about the taxes, the tariffs, the other duties that need to be paid to the government or to the other organization, private organization, the managing this waste, to send them to the landfill, to send them to the incineration, or to be collected for scientific purposes, to be studied for digestion, biological especially, or something else. Another way of thinking between the community, scientific community, is that most of the opinions are running straight ahead to the recycling position of the waste to be managed. There are some dangerous wastes. There are some hospital discharges. There are some military, let's say, deposit from the past. And there are some mountains of the waste that has been collected in years in history or from the production industry that need to be managed. And all this seems to be a huge problem to be solved. It is not laid properly to be solved, but it needs some opportunity. Exploiting your presence here, we are proud that we have the possibility to have your own opinion, to exchange the ideas, and to let each others know what is the definite way to be treated, to be thinking yet, to wait for some other time, to enter some new technologies, or just to send to the deposit, to the landfill, and then let the problems exposed to the gases, to the leachate, or to other things moving and fading to the environment, underground, on the ground, and on the air. So I should open discussion with it.
Thank you very much. I'll show something. A friend of mine that worked in the government at the beginning of years 90 was close to the prime minister of that time. And he told me that when the first day that the prime minister was set in his office, he had plenty of files, proposal projects for the incineration of the waste. And as a matter of fact, he didn't decide any time in his period being prime minister, to establish an incinerator in Albania. What happened? Last 3-4 years in Albania, although the strategy for the management of the waste is based on what has been shown here, which is in according to the waste directive of EU, but it was taken abruptly a decision to establish 3 incinerators. And this, as my colleague mentioned, opened a debate. Civil society, media, etc. Government already is in a difficult position because some points for the corruption came in light. Even a minister already is in the prison, a member of the parliament, and I don't know when we'll stop it. But however, from my experience being in politics, as I mentioned in the first day, is that the people that should be heard is this environment, firstly, by the politicians. Unfortunately, is not the role of the scientists is not very important. It's not, we are not in the table where decisions are taken. At least it's happening in Albania. I don't know in your countries, but as I have heard, in many countries around the world exists more or less the same situation. So it's very important what my colleague mentioned, that at least the science should have a clear option about what will be the roadmap of the management of the waste. And in order, if we have dilemma, imagine what happens with politicians. And I agree with the idea that the recycling is very important economically, from the environmental point of view, while incineration brings many problems, especially in the countries like Albania, because for the incinerators, it's very important a strong monitoring system, which unfortunately in Albania doesn't exist. For that reason, probably Albania is not in the right time without forcing such capacities to go ahead running with incineration. And anyway, I mentioned some fragments in order to provoke and to know your experience. I have seen, for example, that in the region, only in Slovenia is 1 incinerator. As I know, in Croatia, doesn't exist. In Serbia, doesn't exist. In Greece, doesn't exist. In Montenegro, doesn't exist. And in Macedonia doesn't exist. And so, for that reason, I have many questions about Albanian steps. Are the right way or not? But as I mentioned, we have to construct bridges of communications with the people and the governments where decisions are taken. And our voice should not be closed here, but should be in public. And we have to lobby, let's say, in order to say our words.
So, before opening the discussion, I would just say 2 words regarding this issue. During the time I served in politics, I had to deal with the issue of the waste, and actually it's crucial to apply the directive of EU and have a strategy of waste management which should go according to a CONUS which means we have to follow the right steps, and the incineration should be the last one. But actually, this depends often on the costs of waste management, for sure, and secondly, on the capacities of one country has. And if these two things will not be fulfilled, then we cannot have the conus of waste management, or as it is called, we cannot have the reverse pyramid of treatment. But of course, we'll go that way that the politic will like sometimes. And I just want to give you a short idea about incineration, because this topic is quite hot, not in Albania, but also in all Europe. And some countries are deciding to lock down the incinerators because of the environmental issues. If we consider incinerating let's say in Europe, the cost of incineration of 1 ton might vary from 100 euro to 180 euro, actually, depending on the country. But if we consider that for countries in development, this cost might be up to 60 or 70 euros, or almost half of the amount required in the other part of Europe, so the more developed one. And the idea now is whether this amount of money required for the incineration will be enough, or the country will afford it for the incineration of its waste. This is a big issue, and therefore this influences the decisions on building the incinerators and their use. Therefore, taking these steps actually should be well matured and should be well discussed with a group of interest, and of course with universities and centers of knowledge regarding this issue. This was my point. So now everybody of you can ask questions and can discuss about this issue.
Thank you. I have two questions or comments or questions. One is for Professor Klemes, and the other one is for Professor Barai. So I will start with the one for Professor Klemes. Let's say we try to reuse and reduce the waste as much as we can, and then we separate the biological part and we turn it into biogas, which is probably the most efficient way. I'm not a waste expert. I don't know much about expert, but I know quite a lot about climate change mitigation and accounting of greenhouse gases. So why don't we consider burying plastic waste as CCS? I mean, this is a carbon removal technology. It's actually better for climate than if we burn it. If we can reuse it, okay, but I don't see much recycling of plastics actually being viable. So what do you think about this completely unusual proposal? I never heard it. I know it's not really considered acceptable, but from the point of view of somebody who is doing accounting of CO2, it makes sense.
I can,
The microphone to Professor.
I think the answer is so. I think my voice is strong enough to get it. Let's make a simple case study. This conference, after coffee break, the waste bins are full of cups. If I've been on a conference in Asia, there were no cups. People were reusing the bottles. I am actually doing it here as well. I've got a PET bottle, which I put the water. This tea is a little bit more complicated, but Asians got for tea, this glass tube, and they've got leaf tea, and they put it in. And you can use it even for coffee. So never, my idea is the next Deves to negotiate with the hotel and make it similar. I will donate you one such a thermal bottle which you can use for the coffee and tea, which we are having it as a souvenir from Spill. When you come to Brno, you will get one. So, but this is just the case study. We can avoid a lot of waste if there are some management measures made. And we should start not to discuss if recycle or incinerate or landfill. We should start at the top of the pyramid, you know, to minimize it. What Neven said about biological waste, it is absolutely true. Our family is composting it, and surprise, surprise, the amount of the waste is about half. But city of Brno now introduced not only this yellow, green, red, but also brown, and people can sort and separate also bio-waste, and it immediately reducing you a lot of it. I am still not happy with plastics, because plastics are those yellow containers, but by classification there are 16 different plastics. And what you said about recycling, if you've got clean PET, it's very valuable resource, and everybody would buy it very happily. But if it's mixed, it's a problem. So there are reserves, you know. Those, ideally, on each of them, I don't know how it is here, but in the EU, you've got a number of one of those 16 different plastics. And ideal would be separation 1 to 1, 2 to 2. And in this case, we can even recycle the reasonable plastic. But the best is to avoid not paper cups, not straws in McDonald's. You know, it's been a discussion. The straw, which if you buy a McDonald's coffee, you've got it for drinking. What is the better? If it should be biological, if it should be paper, if it should be plastic, but the solution is none. I can drink the coffee like this. I don't need to use the straw. So we should think about the management, and as a citizens, and especially as the managers and as university teachers, we should teach and educate people in this way, not to deal with the final amount of the waste.
But this is
it's not, it's just for online.
this is a slow process, and we have to somehow resolve the current situation also. I'm talking about the transitional side, and now my question is to Professor Barai. We have done quite a lot of environmental studies on using waste as alternative fuel in cement industry. The advantage of incinerating it as a fuel in cement industry is that you don't create a lock-in effect. Once you build a waste to energy plant, then it means 30 years at least you need to provide it with waste. And as Jiří has correctly said, we want to reduce this waste. And this happened already in Scandinavia. They have not enough waste. They have to import waste in order to keep their waste to energy plants viable. So in my opinion, cement plants are a hugely better solution for the waste, this transitional problem with plastic wastes, because it doesn't create a lock-in effect. Now the question is there a cement plant in Albania? In Slovakia, they use 80% of waste as fuel. So it's a great potential.
You are sure 80?
80, yes, yeah. We work with them, with Holcim Slovakia, and they managed to reach 80% waste as a fuel.
As a matter of fact, is something that I am saying for the first time. When started this idea of the incinerator, I had the communication with the Prime Minister of Albania, and I have sent a message to him, exactly what you are saying, that we don't need incinerators in Albania because we have several cement factories that are not using actually waste that have some calorific power, and is a good option, even because the temperature used in the incinerators is higher than in the cement factories, is higher than is used in the incinerators. So the toxic substances are in lower level, and you could oblige these factories as well to increase the monitoring process. Is easier. And I agree with you. Some years ago, when I was member of the parliament, I put in an article of the law exactly what you are saying. But it was a huge reaction from the civil society discussing that, look, they are importing waste from abroad in order to bring toxic waste and to burn these. No, it wasn't that the reason, because Albanian law doesn't permit importing the waste from abroad. I pointed out this several times, but they didn't like to hear this. For that comes something that, firstly, transparency of the governments, politicians. And secondly, you have to collaborate with media to clarify any step of yours that is not harmful. On contrary, is on the benefit of the environment. We had to use this to select calorific waste and to give to the cement factories. And they wanted that because the price is decreased of the cement production. So this is quite right. But for that, I think that scientists should be more in public, should be invited by the politicians in order to persuade and to educate the people that the steps taken are good. And professor from Czech Republic, from Brno, mentioned that we have to educate ourselves and the people. The first thing that we should do is to educate the politicians. The first thing is very important, because if we have educated politicians, they will act according to the science, according to the laws, nature laws. So, thank you.
Okay, I'm Petar Varbanov from Brno University of Technology. First, just a clarification question about cement production. I would expect that they have a very strict environmental monitoring on the outputs, yes? So this also plays in favor of waste usage there, because after incineration, you get a lot of unwanted outputs and you want to control and minimize them. Yeah. And the other is we did a preliminary study on how much waste we can recycle from municipal solid waste and obtain minimum footprints. And what we could estimate was something like 35–40%. And after that recycling rate, footprints actually steeply get up, because you have to put additional resources to perform the recycling. So in that context, the question is, do you have any examples, or if you heard somebody doing that redesign in many R's, because obviously we have to go upstream and really severely minimize the waste.
Well, I wanted to add just 2 points. One of the points is using the waste actually in the cement factories. In order to use these wastes, first the waste have to be separated. In order to collect them separately, it means plastic separated from wood and separated from other waste like metal, glass, and so on. The problem in southeastern Europe is that in most of the countries the waste are not collected separately, and they are mixed. And using mixed waste creates a problem with the temperature of the oven, which if you introduce them such mixed waste, they will decrease it abruptly, leading to actually some chemical reactions, which will lead to dioxins and other poisonous compounds. So this is a big issue, firstly. And in order to keep this temperature the same point, should be some coal or burning material with high calorific burning material should be added. And this increases actually the cost of the process itself. So first is it has to be collected separately, which is not happening. And the education of population should start exactly at this point to collect wastes separately. The second point I wanted to add is regarding Professor Jiří Klemeš's demand of trying to ban plastic or reduce it at maximum. This is not an easy issue because it's a commodity. I'm against it, but people are used to it. It's like cell phones nowadays. You cannot remove cell phone from people's hand because they are used to it. And in order to ban plastic, we'll need maybe centuries. It's very difficult for that. So we need to undergo a clear process of trying to reduce it slowly and to substitute it with other materials which will help us to confectionate or maybe transport goods which we have been confectionating or transporting up to now using plastics. So I see this as a really as a issue which is not easy to undertake.
I'd like to make a comment what Kledi said concerning the banning of the plastics. I think I agree more with Professor from Czech Republic, because let's start from here in this hotel. If the owner of this hotel is sensitive, really, they hadn't to use this for coffee, but to use, you know, the ceramic or glass, and is a matter of education. And we should limit them, using them. There are some areas that we could not limit in construction, etc. But in the day, using so frequently, I don't find it normal. Even at the university, in the faculty, at my department, I see that they use a lot of these plastics. Why not to use your own glass for everything that, but, and something else is true that the selection, for the first point, selection is very important. It's a matter of education. But I have seen in Germany a center where the waste came mixed, and the people working there with masks and so on, and they separated them. This is for the incinerator, this is for, and this is for the landfill, etc. So I think that even in countries like our country, we could use this practice that already is used in Germany or somewhere else, developed countries.
To my opinion, seems to be that more simple problems to be, let's say, put for having a solution. The solution, as it is already mentioned here, seems to be easy to be described, easy to be understood, and but nobody is looking forward to see that it is a need for a compromise that needs to be reached between engineering, economic, and friendly to the environment of the process that need to be reduced, to be recycled, to be such and such. We have already done some experiments in the cement plant in Albania. We have got 3 or 4 big. Sometimes they say that are the biggest in the region. But anyway, they have started using the used tires. And the percentages is not so terrible. The figures you have already mentioned, around 80% that need to be replaced, the classical fuels. Alternative fuels that need to be used in cement clinker oven, Köln, as it is in their own vocabulary. To my opinion, disturbing the mineralogy of the clinker, disturbing the volume of the gases, disturbing the impact, very bad impact of the chlorine or PVC from PVC, from plastics, and from other polymer materials that are in their end of usage. It is very carefully necessity for decision to be taken for putting a determined amount of waste alternative fuels replacing the classical. To my opinion, in our case that we have already studied, it is not more than 30%, sometimes 18, sometimes 20, 23, and 20 and 30, but not more. But care should be taken for the fact that it is needed for some additional investment in order to use some organic wastes, some alternative fuels for this cement plant. Of course, it is needed some burning room, some controlling the volume of the gases, the temperature of the gases, in order to keep the same condition, the mineralogy, the mineral compounds of the clinker. So this compromise being the process that have to be proposed, friendly to the environment, the economically feasible, and the engineering performance of the process that have to be proposed, it is land filling or composting, as the professor is already mentioned, or incineration. Care should be taken in the final decision. To give some opinions, it is easier, but to go to an end, to practicing, to propose as a definite behavior of the social organization or some other politicians or some institutional, or at the end, the community, the scientific community need to be really well acceptance from the entire society. How can be done this? It's because picking some good words and some good strategies, some good objectives to be reached, it is easier. But how? So a big discrepancy is between our countries' behavior on the West. How it is being used somewhere or some other way. It's really a big question.
Thank you for this very timely meeting. To my point of view, the reusability is also very important. As an example, in my own apartment, when a new tenant comes, it changes everything. And it doesn't just change, but breaks them, the tires, everything goes to the junkyard. These should be designed for reuse, easily replaceable. If they want to replace, let them do it. But I am sure there'll be secondary, tertiary customers that are willing to use them. Also designed for life. The cell phones, they are simply quits. If you are not quite lucky, after 3 years, they say designed for a limited life. So there is also some room for legislation so that these large companies, whoever they are, should be closely monitored to make their designs durable. The same goes also for classical, I mean, standard automotive industry. Every year or every 6 months, they change the model. Why? My car is 13 years old, and I am happy with that. And the gas mileage is okay. So why should I change it? Because most of the parts go to the junkyard. Some minimum parts goes to recycling, but before recycling, we should be able to use or implement reuse in different sectors or in the same sector. Can be done. And don't forget that the life designed for a limited life is one of the worst cases in environmental pollution and energy. It's not really made. It has an embodiment of carbon dioxide, energy, cost, everything. So why should I use it? Because when I take it to a repair shop, they said a new one is cheaper. But that's how the economy works. Someone should have a legislation that, of course, there will be exceptions, you drop it or whatever, but if under normal conditions, any product should work like refrigerators, everything, at least 10 years. That's another aspect. Thank you.
We have a question from one meeting, which Alberto asked, in Latin America, we have many industries that generate waste. How can we develop waste treatment policies? How do we organize the industry around these issues?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's so my pleasure being here, but I was provoked with your question to give as the thoughts from more perspective of system engineering. So in this complex level, and we think we have a lot of knowledge from different perspective, but the point is not the integration of this knowledge on vertical and horizontal approach, because this question should be integrated approach. So Professor mentioned that why we are not using, but there are some models that say if we don't upgrade new versions, the economic growth will decline. So there is a pro and contra. Then there is another group we discussed about the reusing, and then we did a lot of research on so-called electronics, recycling, reuse, doing research by scratch, and many definition in this direction. From the system engineering, when you design a system, you will also take in consideration the end of life management. So you have to. I don't know if we do this in practice, but from the theory, we have to consider what will happen by the end. But if you see from the public policy, they care some of those elements, but not by the end. So and I think what we tried not to have a kind of so-called national public policy simulation lab is to combine the public policy praxis or knowledge with system engineering. So engineering part and policy part in order to come to kind of prototypes, because I think just in the modeling of prototyping, we can simulate the case, what is the impact, and then I think it can help to decision making and have more tangible reaction, the impact, because they don't have this tangible point, and this is the problem that they are sometimes not clear how to deal. And but in this part, I fully agree that all stakeholders should take part. So not only one side, but also media. For example, we take another simulation of nutrition of children under 5 years old in a country. We saw that we don't have a specialized journalist for this. So nobody is specialized to deal with these issues. Then we saw that there are very few, or maybe not a supplier on this specialized way. So we see that ecosystem does not exist or don't fit with each other. I think also in this case, waste should be considered in an integrated approach, in a bit more complex. But I think now we are able to do such a complex system as we could not do before. So I think this is the collaboration, integration, and then we'll see what happened in the part, but not only one view, because I think it's not more enough for just having from one side view of the entire decision making. So this is my opinion in this regard. And I think what as an engineer should learn, I think we have also to have a self-critic or scientist to learn to communicate with political decision makers. Because I think we as a system engineers, we can really design very performance-based systems, but we are not able to communicate or be in the right time, in the right place with them. I think we don't understand when is the right time to go to the minister and say, please do it. This is my opinion, that we have as in our education, creating some communication skills or whatever, because we don't think that we understand them very well. This is as my opinion. But yeah, thank you.
I have used in analytical chemistry, study the interferences of different factors. And for that, I have used factorial design. And what you mentioned is really that science could optimize a step in order to have less harmful effects and to have the maximum of the benefit. And for that, I think I was thinking when you spoke, probably a kind of study using some even mathematical models could be useful. So optimization is very important in life and even in politics, and taking into account all these factors that you mentioned. Concerning the other question that you mentioned, that you have difficulties to communicate, I mentioned several times. In the first day, I said that if you have a proposal, or if a colleague of you is proposed for to take a step political position, should accept, should not avoid it, because being there, you will help your colleague, or you could help them to increase the communication. Is a kind of education as well. No? This happened in Albania at the beginning, when many people that hadn't a political background, they have been involved in politics. So no, any chair will be empty. Somebody will sit down there. It's better to be sit down, somebody that is really helpful for the society, even losing something in science. But his role in the developing the country, the society, will be increased.
I've got one provocative question. What is preventing many European countries to follow the lead of Nordic countries, which are putting deposit on each bottle, glass, plastic, can? You know, if you are in Norway, everything is 1 Norwegian crown and everything is returned. If not by customers, it's my experience from early morning flight from Trondheim. It was somebody whom we consider homeless, but in Norway there are not homeless people. But at 5 in the morning, he was carrying plastic bag and collecting all those remains of heavy drinking from the last night, and probably had something 200 Norwegian crowns in the plastic bag, cleaned the streets, and reduced very considerably the amount of the waste. I asked this in my home country, and it's a huge politician discussion. Even producers, producers of mineral water, they wanted to do, but the government, who is declaring sustainability and all this nice words, actually didn't allow it. So, Neven, have you got some experience?
Yes, a member of SDEWES International Scientific Committee, Professor Nikola Ružinsky, while he was Secretary of State for Environment, he implemented such a scheme in Croatia. And that's absolutely the most successful scheme, environmental scheme regarding waste management in Croatia. All the waste was cleaned. Before that, we had bottles everywhere, plastics in the forest, in the rivers. Now you don't see anything. There is, at least in the beginning, there were approximately 15,000 people living from collecting this waste and returning it back. So we actually solved also important social problem because these people had not enough money for covering their basic costs. And we cleaned the country. The problem that appeared was that at one point we started cleaning neighboring countries, because Bosnia, for example, then we had to introduce rule of origin. So we started only giving.
But why?
Well, because they open even factories in neighboring countries that produce plastic bottles in order to sell them, because the money that you need to produce the bottle is lower than you were getting from the Croatian scheme. But all in all, with these small mistakes, I think that the scheme was hugely successful.
And reducing amount of waste and
Yes.
solving social problems.
And we are a tourist country. Cleanliness of the country is critical for the success of our tourism.
So this is advice for Albania.
Well, according to my knowledge, we had such an offer to our government to introduce exactly this kind of return back system, or as it's called in Germany, fund system, which is quite famous. It is a very nice system, but the problem is that it increases initially, let's say, the cost of the product, which will discourage people to buy it. And due to the reduction of the sales, they will try to avoid this, at least initially, till people will be used to this system. Later on, it might function quite well, like Croatia now, or like it's running in Germany or other countries, which is very successful. But the only problem for the beginning is the initial costs. So instead of buying water of 25 cents, let's say you have to pay probably 50 cents or more, and people will just be discouraged of this amount. That's all. And in Germany, it's 25 cents for bottle. So it means you have to pay that back. I think in Finland is the same system. Use it. Yes.
Actually, this waste bottle or waste paper collection is becoming an industry. In Turkey, for example, finally the government recognized the benefits of depositing and collection from garbage or wherever they collect, and now the government is going to give social benefits, even uniforms, so that they are now a part of the social structure of the people. So they are given honor because they are doing an honorable job, actually, recycling, helping to recycling. So this might be another avenue. Don't let the just poor people to do that. Of course, the poor people should be organized, given some social benefits, and let them do it lawfully. This is another avenue. Thank you.
One last point, maybe I wanted just to mention that quite often waste management depends on also on the country's territory. So there are small countries which cannot implement properly the strategies. For example, let's take the case of Malta, having not so much territory to landfill. Then other solutions are taken into account, like recycling, and missing of such technology in that small country, then everything would go to incineration and production of energy out of it. So that is also another issue which should be taken into account when we consider the conversion of waste into energy.
Yeah, well, going back to the issue of the incinerators, I remember I was in 2017 or 2018 in a conference in Kosovo, and I had the chance to speak with the guy that was at the time the Minister of Innovation. And I was telling him that the energy system in Kosovo is 100% dependent of coal. It's the same case for Montenegro. Albania, of course, has a lot more hydropower. It's a little bit more diversified, but I don't exactly remember the case for Croatia and Macedonia. But I was telling him, like, from the point of view of somebody that was coming from Finland, and that, as you mentioned, they are like having these waste incinerations that they produce electricity and heat, and they are not generating enough waste for themselves, so they have to import. I was telling them that the first country in the Balkans, at least in my opinion, that starts having like this, for example, it converts one of the coal power plants and modifies it to then waste incinerator with good air pollution control, like they use in somewhere in Scandinavia. They have like literally reserves of waste because there is a lot of landfills in the area. And the first one will have the opportunity to both have the local source plus the neighboring source. So it will be, at least in my opinion, it might be the one that makes the most profit out of this, the first that implements it in the Balkans. But I think that would be like a way to stray away a little bit from coal in the area.
Are there other questions or remarks, discussions? Okay.
Okay, one more interesting scheme from Croatia. This separating problem for waste is significant because our populations are not used to that. So a good way to start is to have a pilot scheme somewhere to show how it works. In Croatia, it was island of Krk. There was a local community that really wanted to do it. There was a strong support for the scheme among the activists, among the politics, among the citizens. So it was easy to implement. It was not being done against the will of the people, but together with the people. And they managed to separate around 30% of waste after 1 year of implementation, which is actually quite a good result. Now they're at 70% of separation. So those are mostly houses, not buildings. So everybody was composting their biological part of the waste and separating the rest of the waste. And it worked very nice. It's not easy to transfer that to cities, of course, but it's a way that can be used by other communities to slowly move to that way. Because basically, if we increase one day the cost of waste collection, People will like to compost the biological waste because they want to reduce the cost of waste disposal. It's a long process, but this is maybe the way to start. Another one, of course, is to have mechanical, biological plants which do it centrally, but this is a relatively expensive system also. So we are in Croatia not sure which one is better. We have both systems. We're playing with both systems and we're still learning. We are quite bad pupils of more advanced economies, but it's important to start seeing what is the best solution for your country, because there is no one single rule for everybody.
Professor, I will show an example from my experience. When I worked in Rio Grande do Sul, I had a student from São Paulo. And we were discussing about the waste. And she told me that when she was in the preliminary school, the teacher said to them, if you bring separately paper, glass, and plastics in the school will benefit, will get some money, and will construct something there that has an impact on the children. When this girl went at home, she said to her mother, and the mother that was almost analphabet, she started to separate them. And after 15 years, the mother still continued to do the same thing. So with this example, I would like to say that education of the children is very important. If they say to parents that you have not to throw out this plastic when they are in the car, that randomly we see in Albania or somewhere else, and has a huge impact compared with the message that the government or the media says is fast, quite fast. This, but for that should be invested in the, in the young generation. Is very important, and to find the right way. Thank you.
So
If I may support your words, and Neven's story about the island of Kirk, they were doing exact the same. So they started in kindergarten to educate the children how to separate, so they have a separation from kindergarten to let's say primary school, secondary school, and then general population.
Thank you very much. Coming to the point that in nature there is basically, we can say no waste because the outputs can become the inputs and there's an ecosystem. So in trying to replicate that concept that some governments, they state this ideal and this vision to be a a zero waste country or a zero waste municipality. So how do we build this ecosystem? Can, for example, better utilization of big data, could that help us link the outputs to the inputs? Or, for example, how can cities be empowered to enhance the urban metabolism? How could the monitoring be enhanced for them to do that? And also in universities, because, for example, in laboratories, bioplastics are being developed, but does that university use the bioplastics that are being used, that are being developed in their laboratory, or what they can do to upscale? Because at one point, reduction is very important, education is very important, but then how do we replace or make use or utilize the remaining? And that also involves the substitution of the materials. So in building this ecosystem, what would be your reflections? And also our science advisors, should they also be supported more in getting the realization and implementation of zero waste targets?
Well, this concept actually is quite complex, I would say, and depends a lot on the country. So it's not somehow to globalize, but we can have bigger countries which have no capacities of, firstly, waste separation. So you'll see mountains of waste collected, and there is quite difficult, to manage that kind of waste. So this is actually quite crucial problems and needs time to be resolved, starting from education, legislation, and following issues which might be connected also to different systems, which might be implemented in those countries. So that is my idea. Maybe there are other opinions about that. I hope, yes.
Then I would like to open a completely other aspect of waste. It's a financial side, how to put the financial mechanisms well. This is not so simple as it looks like, because if you want to have a rational way of incinerating part of the waste in cement plants, we need to have a good financial scheme that will make RDF cheaper than fossil fuels, because otherwise cement plants will not burn it. And also it has to be cheaper than competing RDF. RDF is refuse derived fuel, so it's the high calorific value of waste. So that's the one you can burn in a cement plant. You cannot burn municipal waste. So a Croatian problem, for example, is that our production of RDF is actually costly, and we end up with a price which is higher than the competing Austrian price. So cement plants are actually importing RDF, and Croatian RDF is not really easy to sell. So if you have a small country like Croatia or Albania, you cannot really dismiss the fact that we have a common market. Since you're outside of EU, can ban imports of RDF, but you will soon start, I hope, negotiating, and then you will have to allow imports of RDF because it's a common market. So basically you have to build a mechanism which will work on a gate fee basis that will produce a relatively similar price of RDF as in competing producing countries. Otherwise, it will not be balanced properly. And this is quite difficult because that means that the price of waste disposal also has to be relatively high, because Austrians can afford it. They can charge to their population a higher price than we can. So it's even more complicated. I don't know, what are your comments on this financial side? Did Albanian government think about these issues? There are no, I think, competing RDF productions close by, but you have ports, so it's easy to import RDF by boats.
In Albania and provoked the environment, public environment, and they were against this. But as you said, this will be a challenge for Albania, not only for that, but for all the goods in that, because it's a competing process, and Albania should enter with in order to compete. Otherwise, we'll be disappointed entering in EU. So it's really is very important, this, but has not been discussed until now, as I know, as far as I know. But it's very important, this.
reduced derived fuels are not entering from abroad in Albania. None to be produced over there. None. Nobody has planned to brought it from abroad. But it is an added value of the pretreatment organic municipality or other source waste. We have already tested in. We have a pyrolyzed pilot plant in my lab, and we have tested putting this pre-treated organic waste with increasing a little bit calorific value of them and entering into not at the same place when the classical fuels are entering, but in coaxial, let's say, who knows the clinker kiln. But nobody has put for economic solution for this. It is to be treated yet. The big issue.
Are there other questions, discussion points, or remarks? Maybe from people which are following us from remote. Well, if we'll not have further questions, discussion, or remarks, then I see now that we came to the point to conclude this panel, and thank all of you for participating and discussing in it. And I hope that discussing these issues will give a message to our politicians and also to the group of interest to improve the waste management and, of course, their conversion into energy. Thank you.